we really want to welcome you into the beating heart of this organization now. And you've had some fantastic models already of what great citizen leaders look like. You've had a really good look at the kind of people that we are going to invest in you so that you can become. I'm going to turn over to Joe. He's going to give a few remarks, and then Joe will throw it in. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Ben. Niall Ferguson is one of the, I guess, great minds in our world. He jokes there's not too many other geniuses going into history these days, but I think he definitely meets that bar. It's true. Unfortunately, a lot of the departments have become so politicized that you don't get a lot of the great minds there anymore. But he's definitely a top thinker. He's at Oxford, at Harvard, at Stanford. So and I learn a lot from every time I interact with him. And Niall, it's really awesome to be your partner in building this. And thanks for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I'm being told to shout. I can shout. And I have a lot to shout about tonight. I was asked to talk to you seriously, academically. I have some content for you tonight. Let me begin with a quotation. It's the epigraph of a book. The world is suffering from a lack of faith in a transcendental truth. Those words were written by a man named Julien Bondar, a French intellectual, in a book published in the later 1920s, La Treason des clercs, normally translated as the treason of the intellectuals. It's a book worth reading. When he used the word clerks, what Bondar meant was, quote, all those whose activity is not the pursuit of practical aims, all those who seek their joy in the practice of an art or science or metaphysical speculation. We would say intellectuals, perhaps academics. People like me who are not clever enough to be founders of great companies like Joe. This is what Bondar observes. At the end of the 19th century, he wrote, a fundamental change occurred. The clerks began to play the game of political passions. The men who had acted as a check on the realism of the people began to act as its stimulators and share in the chorus of hatreds among races and political factions. The characteristics of today's clerks, he said, were the tendency to action, the thirst for immediate results, the exclusive preoccupation with the desired end, the scorn for argument, the excess, the hatred, the fixed ideas. Quote, they betrayed their duty, which is precisely to set up a corporation whose sole cult is that of justice and of truth. Instead, he wrote, the intellectuals of his day embraced, quote, the cult of the strong state and the military spirit. The logical end, he wrote, of the integral realism professed by humanity today is the organized slaughter of nations or classes. This is an amazing passage. Get this. I can well imagine, this is the mid-1920s, it was published in the late 1920s. I can well imagine a future war when a nation would decide not to look after the enemy wounded. I can imagine them priding themselves on getting free from stupid humanitarianism. The book is prophetic. It's an amazing prophecy of precisely what happened in World War II, when the systematic neglect of prisoners by the Nazis was a characteristic feature of the war on the Eastern Front. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because the intellectuals of our time have also committed treason. Now, superficially, there's a difference. The intellectuals of the 1920s leant to the right Many endorsed fascism, while today's intellectuals generally lean to the left. But in practice, it makes very little, if any, difference, because the harm is done as soon as a professor takes it upon himself or herself to be a political activist. It's that moment when the line is crossed from Wissenschaft, from scholarship or science, to politique, to politics. That is the fatal moment. As he was writing The Treason of the Intellectuals, German professors were already well on the way to providing justifications for the anti-Semitism that would be the foundation of Hitler's Third Reich. In our time, American professors have become apologists for the anti-Semitism and terrorism of Hamas. And I mean it very seriously when I say that the fate of the great German universities, of Heidelberg, of Tübingen, of Marburg, their fate in the 1930s and 1940s is a terrible warning to the elite universities of the United States. How bad, you may say, are our established universities? Let me tell you. According to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, the number of campus deplatforming attempts soared to a record high last year. There were 137, up from 81 in 2022. Let's look at the latest Heterodox Academy report. In 2022, which is the most recent data we have, 59% of students reported being reluctant to discuss at least one of 5 controversial topics they were asked about. 62% of students said that was because, quote, other students would make critical comments with each other after class. 63% of students, this is in universities across the country, agreed that the climate on their campus prevented people from saying things they believe because others might find these views offensive. Now, what is remarkable is that when you look, and I have looked, at the data for individual universities, there is scarcely any real difference. Chicago is more or less the same as Harvard, which comes bottom of the FIRE rankings for free speech. It turns out that we have a nationwide problem. It isn't just Harvard. And it cannot possibly be healthy for our republic if 60% of students in universities across the country feel they cannot speak their minds in class. Let's talk about the illiberalism of the liberals. The Charlie Institute, which is at North Dakota State, asked a series of fascinating questions, and I want to share them with you because I think the results will stun you. Question, and this was a survey again of students in 4-year programs across the country, a large sample. If many students disagree with the views of someone who has been invited to speak on campus, should the university withdraw the invitation? Liberal and liberal-leaning students said yes in 39% of cases. Conservatives were on 17%. Question, if a required reading for a college class includes content that makes students feel uncomfortable, should that reading be dropped as a requirement? Liberal and liberal-leaning students, 42% said yes. Now get this. Question. If a professor says something that students find offensive, should that professor be reported to the university? 85% of liberal and liberal-leaning students said yes. Question. If a student says something that students find offensive, should that student be reported to the university? 76% of self-described liberal and liberal-leaning students said yes. In these conditions, of course, education becomes indoctrination. Question: have the classes and other academic activities you've participated in during the college year changed your view of the United States? 7% of liberal and liberal-leaning students said it had made their views more positive, 55% more negative. Amongst the conservative and conservative-leaning students, 18% said it had made their views more positive, but 32%, a third, said the experience had made their views of the United States more negative. Do you understand why we're building a new university yet? How do we explain this? What's the reason? Why has this quasi-totalitarian atmosphere spread so rapidly through American higher education and beyond? Because, of course, it spreads downwards into K through 12 and outwards into corporate America. I think John Haidt, my good friend, and Greg Lukianoff, my good friend, came up with a plausible-sounding answer in a book that some of you will know, The Coddling of the American Mind. And their answer was essentially that parenting had produced a series of erroneous assumptions about the nature of life. And now Jonathan has published a new book in which he explains the epidemic of mental ill health amongst young Americans by blaming cell phones and social media. I respect these arguments, but I don't think those are the right explanations for what has gone wrong. I think there are two reasons. The first is the extraordinary and worsening political skew amongst academics, amongst the professors. And the second, which is just as bad, is the tendency of university leaders and administrators to appease or even encourage the new Red Guards in a kind of parody version of Mao's Cultural Revolution. Now, it's often said that professors are always left-wing, like it's just the way things are. Really? Was that the problem in 1920s Europe? Was that the problem in 1930s Germany? No. There's no preordained law that says professors are always liberal. And nor is it the case that it's a steady state. There's an article from 2005 by Rothman, Lichter, and Nevitt, which shows that in 1984, a significant date in this context perhaps, 39% of the American professoriate on average described itself as left. By 1999, that had risen to 72%. At Harvard today, it's basically 95%. So this is not a steady state. There has been a pronounced swing to the left in academia. Mitchell Langbert did an amazing sample of the politics of nearly 9,000 tenure-track PhD-holding professors from 51 of the 66 top-ranked colleges in the US News and World Report of 2017. And he was able to find data on a pretty substantial proportion, 60%, for political registration. And that allowed him to calculate some interesting statistics. 39% of the colleges in his sample were Republican-free. They had no registered Republicans amongst the professors. 78% of departments in his sample either had 0 Republicans or so few as to make almost no difference. And the ratios are great. So the mean Democratic to Republican ratio amongst professors in the sample was 10.4 to 1. But that was skewed by the inclusion of the 2 military colleges at West Point and Annapolis, which are the only institutions in America which have a rough political balance in their faculty. So if you take them out, you discover that the real ratio is actually 13 to 1. In my subject, history, 17.4 to 1. In English literature, 48 to 1. And in anthropology, you can't calculate it because you can't have a ratio of something to 0. But you say, Neil, you pessimistic Scotsman, The tide is turning. It's turning because 2 presidents of eminent colleges have resigned. Liz McGill at Penn and Claudine Gay at Harvard. And so we must have passed peak woke. The pendulum that people love to tell me about. Have you been told about the pendulum? I'd love to see this pendulum. It must be a very big clock, because this pendulum's been swinging for as long as I can remember. Oh, it's about to swing the other way, really. So let me read some headlines from the Harvard Crimson. Since Claudine Gay was forced to resign, not just for her complete mishandling of the events that followed October the 7th, but also because of her serial plagiarism, which included even plagiarizing the acknowledgements in one of her publications, a remarkable feat by any standards. January 3rd, in Gay's fall, a McCarthyist tragedy. January 3rd again, Gay's resignation is not a win against anti-Semitism. January the 4th, rebuffing calls to resign, Penny Pritzker, 81, will stay in top Harvard Corporation post. January the 5th, ex-Harvard President Claudine Gay acknowledges mistakes, calls critics demagogues. The pendulum is really swinging back, isn't it? January the 18th, Harvard alumni split over Claudine Gay's resignation amid controversy. February the 3rd, Zuckerberg-Ackman-backed Harvard overseer candidates fail to qualify for ballot. February the 7th, this is my favorite. Plagiarism is the right's newest weapon. Harvard must disarm it. You can't make this stuff up. This is not Babylon Bee. This is the Harvard Crimson. February the 7th, same day. Investing in trans inclusion isn't a choice, it's Harvard's imperative. February the 11th. Pro-Palestine groups rally, demand Harvard divest ties to Israel. And remember, back on December the 10th, more than 700 faculty members signed a letter to the Harvard Corporation urging them to resist calls from outside forces to remove Claudine Gay from her post. If you believe the pendulum has begun to swing in the other direction, I have copies of the Harvard Crimson to sell you. Now, here is why the pendulum can't possibly swing at these established institutions. Because if you think the professors of my generation are politically doctrinaire, let me introduce you to their successors. My good friend Eric Kaufman, who recently moved to the University of Buckingham, asked people at US universities if they agreed with this proposition. Quote, "My fear of losing my job or reputation due to something I said or posted online is a justified price to pay to protect historically disadvantaged groups. I don't mind being cancelled if it helps the marginalized." Well, you won't be surprised to hear that of my age group, 60 plus, 15% agreed with that statement. In their 50s, 20% agreed. Get into the age group of the 40s, a third agreed. 2/5 of people in their 30s agreed. 45% of those in their 20s, and more than half of people questioned aged between 18 and 25. So the future of academia is anything but a swing rightward of the pendulum. Kaufman asked social science and humanities staff and PhDs if they would support one or more campaigns to oust dissenting academics, whether they criticized DEI, non-traditional parenting, unrestricted immigration, or said something nice about empires, which I'm afraid I have done. 24% of US faculty and 20% of Canadian faculty would have supported at least one of those dismissal campaigns. But the proportion rises to 49% of US and Canadian PhD students. 20% of US academics openly admitted to discrimination against right-leaning academics' grant applications, and 12% admitted to discriminating against right-leaning paper submissions or promotion applications. But when you turn to PhDs, 24% openly admit to discriminating against right-leaning paper submissions, and fully a third to discriminating against right-leaning grant bids. The politicization is quite overt, and it is going to get worse, because the institutions continue to hire to the left of the tenured faculty. The cultural revolution of our time, the totalitarian regimes on our campuses, are not about to go away. What can we do? The only possible answer, in the face of what I've described to you, must be to found new institutions. As Thomas Jefferson did with the University of Virginia, as William Rainey Harper did with the University of Chicago, as we are doing with the University of Austin. It was in this very house that we announced that we were doing it. And it's just 2 years ago. And some of you may remember derision, the opprobrium, the abuse that rained down upon us from a hostile establishment. But we are going to do this. And we have to do this. We must do this. We're going to solve the 5 core problems of university governance that I believe explain why all the universities have gone down the same totalitarian drain. First, we're going to address the failing pseudo-corporate structure of governance that allows ineffectual or negligent trustees and overmighty, politically active presidents. That's not an option here. We're going to address the fact that in other universities there is no judicial branch of government and therefore no due process. We will be the first university with a real constitution and real due process, because our constitution will be upheld by the equivalent of a Supreme Court. We, through our constitution, will make it impossible to politicize the work of the University of Austin. It will be unconstitutional for the university to take ex officio political positions. It will be wrong and a sackable offense for professors to abuse their power to indoctrinate students. We will uphold students' basic rights of free expression and free association, which everywhere else in America are being violated. And I know we will succeed. And you know why I know? Because of the mood in this room and the mood I experienced today in the Scarborough building and the mood last night when Barry Weiss was talking to Roland Frau, 2 of my heroes. The mood contrasted so amazingly with the atmosphere I had encountered earlier this week at one of the most established and venerable universities where I had been invited to lecture. My week was like starting in East Berlin, circa 1970, and arriving in a completely different downtown, free society with people, kindred spirits, who know that freedom, that individual freedom, is the sine qua non for the pursuit of truth. This is why we won't fail. This is why we must succeed. This has been an amazingly uplifting 2 days for me, just as the earlier part of my week made me feel physically sick. I kept expecting the Stasi to burst into my bedroom and take me off. 100 intrepid young people, some of whom are here tonight, are going to be in the founding class. I guess it'll be the class of 2028. And this is going to have bragging rights like nothing else that this generation can possibly achieve. We are in the midst of hiring, and I know how much work my colleagues are putting into this, the world-class faculty to teach them, and to teach them to the highest possible pedagogical standard. One dirty little secret of the Ivy League is that most of the teaching sucks. But I know, because I hear what people say about Patrick Gray, I know that we are going to set a new standard for excellence in the classroom. In our classrooms, there'll be no checking videos on TikTok, because I certainly won't have any devices. In our classrooms, I will have a Chatham House rule. You can't leave the classroom and start attributing things that were said to any individual by name. What's said in the classroom will stay in the classroom. In our classrooms, people will be free to say whatever comes to mind, however stupid. I specialized in saying stupid and offensive things as an undergraduate at Oxford. It was how I learned. It got so bad that one of my tutors once said, "Neil, have you considered a career in the police?" And it's very lucky that I didn't go into the police, actually, for the criminals of England. And this is just the beginning. This is just the early stage. We're closing in, I think I can say, on our target for our first round of fundraising, $250 million. Closing in on that target now. And more donors are seeing that we're doing this. And as they see that we're doing this, the support will grow. And as it grows, so will the University of Austin. With your help, and here I address not the students, but the potential donors in the room, we can keep on building. Not only our cool campus, and it is very, very cool. I have to say, it's way cooler than certain Ivy League institutions I recently visited. Not only can we build that campus and make it a really extraordinary place with an extraordinary library, but we can also build, and I think this is very important, an online presence so that our content can reach not only the lucky 100, but millions and millions of people less fortunate around the world. People like my wife's family in Somalia. I dream of a day when University of Austin content can be accessed even there in the Horn of Africa. Well, we can build a brand where free ideas are available around the world, and that is possible. I can remember a rather fraught conversation with Elon Musk about how quickly we could scale UATX. Come to think of it, with Starlink, we can make this the biggest university on Earth. And our Mars campus is something we'll talk about later, Elon. So let me conclude. We have lived through a second treason of the intellectuals, a second great betrayal of the vocation of intellectuals to pursue truth and not to engage in politics. And it doesn't matter that this time it's a left-wing politicization and not a right-wing one. The net result is uncannily similar. What Bender said was that our mission should be the pursuit of transcendental truth. And we've said all along that that's what we're about, the fearless pursuit of truth. And what I've come to realize, ladies and gentlemen, is how high the stakes are. Because if we do not succeed, the alternative is to allow Western civilization and the world to repeat the hideous mistakes of the mid-20th century. Thank you very much indeed. So, actually, we don't really do lectures, but I was sort of told to give a speech. What we really like is the Socratic method, which means now you get to ask me difficult questions and disagree with me, and that's how we roll.
You and Joanna have been in a debate for a while where I say that you want to be careful that you don't create the mirror opposite to the exclusion from the left, and that you need to try to ensure that you have the pursuit of what you said, where anybody can make a mistake, say whatever they say. But when I listen to your data, then I wonder if I was wrong, where I keep pushing for that, and maybe what you do need to do is bring strengthen. I'm a centrist, but maybe what you need is more right-wing people to counteract the left. Like, so how do you decide between let truth be what you quest for, let really create an environment where you're not trying to tilt the balance to produce ideologically conservative or right-wing people, but just people that are critical thinkers, versus the very reality you just laid out, where given the facts, don't you need more academics that are gonna, more people that are gonna then be able to counterweight what's happening?
Well, thanks for that question. I've been asked it many times. There are those who subscribe to a Sullivan's law that unless an institution is explicitly made conservative, it will inevitably become progressive. I don't believe that's true. In fact, I think it's quite obviously untrue that a university that pursues truth and clarifies that academia is not a political mission will attract the best scholars. And some of them will be conservatives. And some of them will be socialists, and some of them will be liberals, and some of them won't have any politics because they just do physics. And that's how it should be. The Oxford, when I was an undergraduate, was characterized by incredible diversity of thought. There were high Tories, and there were outright communists. One of my best friends as a young historian was Eric Hobsbawm, who was a card-carrying communist. About politics, we disagreed entirely. But I respected him as a scholar and the author of great works of 19th and 20th century history. So let's focus in our recruitment not on politics. Let's not even ask. Let's just make it clear what the rules are. Max Weber got this very right in an extraordinary duo of lectures that he did in the time of the First World War. Politics is a vocation, science is a vocation. And he said these are separate. And when you enter the lecture hall or the classroom, you need to leave your politics at the entrance, to the point that it shouldn't be possible for the students to know what your politics is. I think if we approach it in that spirit, then we'll end up with intellectual diversity. It would, I think, be a great mistake for us to say to ourselves, let's lean to the right to correct for that leaning to the left. There are others doing this, and I don't think it should be our approach. But thank you for asking.
I'm always curious, because you have an expansive view of not just US history, but global history. What elements that you see today have occurred in the past that sort of draw inspiration and strength for you in this journey and all of us? And what world events on the horizon, potentially on the horizon, either have parallels with the past or may help us on this journey?
Let me offer you two thoughts. The first is that universities have the capacity to regenerate themselves. Oxford and Cambridge, and you are a Cambridge man, I am an Oxford man, went through periods of torpor. 18th century Oxford was so dead intellectually that Edward Gibbon said the years he spent there were the most profitless of his life. And he went on to be the greatest historian of the 18th century. So I think if we build this and model academic freedom and model meritocracy and show how academic governance can work and how you can have academic freedom without the abuses of tenure, slowly, it'll be glacial, but slowly, Harvard, even Harvard, will say to itself, if we don't do something along these lines, the smartest students are going to go there. And the smartest future professors are going to go there. And we will start to win, not just in a fight for donors, but in the all-important fight for brains. I think we're already winning. I can tell. I can tell. Every single one of you, every single student I've spoken to tonight has impressed me by their intellectual sharpness and by the obvious appetite they have to learn. So if we build it, eventually I'll be dead. I'll be dead. I'm not going to be alive when Harvard fixes itself. And Gibbon didn't live to see Oxford fix itself. But we will bring a change to higher education across the country. I'm confident of that. But it'll be glacial. The second thing I would say is that in the context of Cold War II, which I believe we've been in for about 5 years, when our adversaries are becoming increasingly organized, when the People's Republic of China cooperates with the Russian Federation and cooperates with the Iranian Republic and cooperates with North Korea, there is an axis of ill will far more real than the imagined axis of evil of 2002. And with every passing month, this coordination becomes more effective. In that context, what we are doing is not just important for the pursuit of truth and the advance of science and literature and philosophy, it's important for national security. Because if we do not produce people who understand liberty and who can think freely, we'll lose Cold War II. One thing about the universities, the established institutions, when the Cold War came the first time, they did their piece. They played a crucial role, Joe alluded to this earlier, in ensuring the national security of the United States. So I think the second great trend I see is that we are in the second Cold War. And we all have to recognize that just because we won the first one, there's no guarantee that we win the second. Especially if a totalitarian ideology has filtered into our educational system, persuading young Americans that the United States was founded on white supremacy and it doesn't really matter if it goes down. Or persuading young Americans that in order to achieve drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, liberty and democracy should be set aside. These ideas are current. In many ways, the other side's game plan for Cold War II is a great deal more successful so far in penetrating our society with their ideas. And so that is another motivation for me. I don't have time, I don't have the years to wait for Harvard to fix itself or Stanford to fix itself. And nor does the United States have time. We need to start producing a self-confident elite that believes in freedom and believes in this country, because we don't have 20 years. The decisive battles may happen this decade. You can see why I chose to stand in front of a simulated apocalyptic landscape.
A lot of people put my generation down and are really pessimistic about it, but I'm seeing actually a lot of good signs, and I'm kind of, not even just this room, but hopeful for my generation. You see the TikToks of people saying this workaday culture is just not right, it's not edifying, and we need to move away from it and go back to the family. I mean, you have sex workers on whatever podcast saying, I want a family. That's the most beautiful thing you can have. And yes, there's this, they have two opposing things that are happening in their minds, but they're seeing what is edifying, and they know it's good. So I wonder, do you see that in our generation?
I do. I think that what is often described as an epidemic of mental ill health is actually something more profound than that. It's a recognition that the status quo is spiritually bankrupt. This is something my wife has written about recently, and I find it very powerful. I think your generation hates the culture in the classrooms of the established universities. I don't think they enjoy self-censorship. Does anybody? My impression is that the students at the major university I visited earlier this week were not having a great time, to put it mildly. So I think your generation is thirsting for just this, just what we're building. When we were starting out, I remember saying to Pano, hey, we should do some market testing. Like, just in case we build it and nobody shows up. Be kind of awkward. And so we did the forbidden courses, Barry's brilliant description of our summer school. And I remember thinking, maybe no one will show up for that. Instead, we were like inundated with inquiries, and those first classes, which we had to hold in Dallas because we had no premises, convinced me that it was going to be okay. It convinced me because the first class, I did a course, a short course on the difference between free and unfree societies. And the readings were just primary sources about what it's like to live in a totalitarian regime. It's like, this is what it was like to be in Hitler's Germany. This is what it was like to be in Stalin's Soviet Union. Here's an account of being Mao's China. Here's Iran under the Ayatollahs. It was a straightforward course, but the content was quite harrowing. And in the course of the first day, I could see the students who were all in existing undergraduate programs from all over the country and sometimes from abroad. They had this look about, like, is this real? Can we actually, I mean, we can just say these things and he's not going to mind. In fact, he's encouraging us. And I don't know if you're Beethoven fans, but in Fidelio, the prisoners are let out. It's the most moving thing in all of opera, really. The prisoners are let out. And they sing this extraordinary chorus about what it's like to be in the free air. And it was just like that. That was when I knew your generation was going to be okay. Because actually, this was what they had been thirsting for, free, uninhibited debate, and the right to take risks. Because I remember, when you're an undergraduate, when you're answering a question, it's risky because you really don't know. And you've just done the reading, and some of it was kind of difficult, and professors have a way of asking weird questions, and so you're like, here goes. I remember people used to say, I don't know if this is what you're looking for. At Harvard, this is what they would say, I don't know, professor, if this is what you're looking for. I said, I'm not looking for anything except what you think. So it's going to be fine. Your generation is going to be fine. The good thing is, you're going to be one of the leaders of your generation. That's the key.
The question I have for you is, we talk about this contraction of academic freedom, and I wonder if, I want to ask you if there's a discrete moment that you can actually point to where you spotted the canary in the coal mine that just sort of ticked your alarms.
What a good question. I'm glad you asked. Yes, I remember exactly when it was. It was 10 years ago. My wife, for those of you who don't know, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I think a much more interesting person than me, who's stood up for women's rights. Like a real feminist who really is prepared to put her life on the line to speak up for women's rights. So she had been invited to give the commencement address at Brandeis University. And we were like, nice. I mean, do it. So she accepted. And then, like a week before the event, they publicly disinvited her. Without warning. That was public announcement, disinvitation of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And the moment the epiphany for me came, when I went and I looked at the petition that had been sent to the president of Brandeis, and I looked at the list of all the faculty members who'd signed that petition calling for my wife to be disinvited, accusing her of Islamophobia. And I listed the name. I have kept it, because I'm from Glasgow. And I don't forgive that kind of thing. The professor of queer studies, who had discovered some inexplicable kinship with the Islamists, and all the others. It was a curious alliance of people who had decided that my wife should not be invited, but should be disinvited and publicly humiliated. That was when I realized that there was a very unholy alliance forming between the radical left, we hadn't learnt to call them woke then, Islamists and others. And it suddenly hit me that I hadn't really noticed, but this had been going on everywhere, even at Harvard. So it was 10 years ago. And the worst thing about the last 10 years is that for nearly all that time, I couldn't make people see, if they weren't in the academy, what was going on. I couldn't make them see. They would just listen to me, oh yeah, Neil, sure. And the strangest thing that I could never have predicted was that the events of October the 7th, terrorist attacks by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad on Israeli civilians, would finally cause the scales to fall from the eyes of so many of my friends outside the academy who had been ignoring our warnings for so long. So it's taken 10 years, but that was for me the beginning. And I hope very much that what we're doing now, what we're doing this weekend, what we're going to do as we build this university, it's the cure. It's the solution. It's the beginning of a successful institutional counter. Because, as I said, there ain't no pendulum. What there is in American history is a pattern of renewal through founding. This country itself is a startup once. The startup that produces the United States. And that's why we consciously based our Constitution on the Constitution of the United States. The separation of powers idea, the idea that you need a judicial branch, just came from the Founding Fathers. I've been playing at James Madison, but with a very strong sense that this is the American solution. You don't just wait for the pendulum to do it for you. You have to do it yourselves. And what is exciting, and I want to thank you all, as a relatively recently minted American, for the fact that you're up for this. Because you could never do this in England. You could never do this in Germany. We have a German potential student here tonight. Constant, where are you? You can do this in Germany, right? Absolutely not. Exactly. That's why you're here. Only in America, ladies and gentlemen, can you start a new university and go from, we're doing this, to admitting students in a 2-year time frame, and the more the haters hate, the stronger we get. That's what I love about America. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've probably talked too long, but I'm passionate about what we're doing. It's the most exciting project of my life, aside from my children. And I have 2 who can come here, by the way. I mean, I am selfishly building it for them. It's kind of positive externality that you get to come to. But I can't tell you how thrilled I am by what we're doing, how optimistic I am, and I'm not famous for my optimism, how optimistic I am that we're going to succeed, and how absolutely certain I am that the first class of 100 are going to just have the ultimate bragging rights for their lives. This will be the thing that people will hate you for and envy you for. It's going to be a killer at dinner parties. You can just imagine it going around the table. Where did you go? Oh, I went to Oxford. Oh, really? I went to Harvard. Oh, really? And where did you go? Well, I was one of the founding scholars at the University of Austin. Silence. Just people just jaws hit the table. That's what it's going to be like. That's what's so exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got drink, we've got food, we've got arguments to have, because we're here to disagree, remember. We're not here to have any kind of conformist line. Thank you for listening. Here's to us.